Hello, and welcome to this tutorial, this introduction to Android Studio. My name is Emmanuel, and I will be taking you through Android Studio, creating a new project. We'll go through the basics that you need to know about Android Studio if you're just a person that's just starting new. This video is going to be 20 minutes long, just to give you a brief introduction of Android Studio. So what we're going to do first is when you first start your Android Studio, you will be presented with this interface. Now I'm going to click on a new project. So if you click on a new project, on this left-hand side, you see that it's a phone, tablet, Wear OS, Android TV, automotive. But what I'm going to select, these are all activities that can help you. So these are basic activities that Android Studio can start you off. So for example, if you want to create an application with no activity, maybe this is usually for those who are advanced, who know exactly how to create an activity from scratch. Maybe you also want a basic activity with a plus or floating add button there. Maybe you want to create a full screen activity, you want to create Google Maps activity, a login activity, which Android Studio will build for you already. You can choose any of these, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I usually going to start off with, an empty activity. So I'm going to select an empty activity, then I'm going to click on next, and then Android Studio will give you the will ask you to enter the name of your application, and this is the package name, and this is where you want to save it. Now you can build applications in Java or in Kotlin. For this purpose, we're going to be using Java, but later tutorials I might introduce how to create applications in Kotlin. And the minimum SDK, you usually would have seen this somewhere else, is the OS that's running, or the SDK that's running on your mobile application. So if you're building your application, you want to choose already, Android Studio will give you a hint that this app will run approximately on 98% of devices. So maybe if you want to build your application, you want it to work on new devices that only have like the OS that's running 12.0, you can. But for this purpose, I'm going to use 5.0, just so that all the phones would also be able to run my application. And then I'm going to click on finish. Then Android Studio is going to build this Android Studio is currently building the project for me. You can see that it's saying that the Gradle project sync in progress. If you're new to Android Studio, don't be overwhelmed by the many things that you're seeing on the screen. We'll go through some of them, not all of them today, but we'll go through some of them. So you can clearly see here that on this screen, you can see here that there's a main activity.java. Now, every Java project usually have a main method. For Android Studio, the main method is called a main activity, which extends app compact activity. And then you would have an onCreate method. Now, onCreate method is where your application is started and built from. That's where it's created. And you can see here what we have here is a super onCreate. So because we are extending the app compact activity, we have a super constructor that we're getting access to. And I'll explain this as the project is built. But this set content view, it refers to a layout. So remember, our main activity.java is, let's say, in our back-end code, and then we'll have a layout for it. So similar to web development, where you have an HTML, you have your CSS, then you have your, let's say you have JavaScript code, or you have your PHP. PHP is like the back-end code that works behind it, your server-side scripting. But when it comes to Android Studio, we have the main activity.java because we're writing in Java, and then we'll have our layouts. Now, Android Studio writes layouts in XML, but the beauty of Android Studio is that it gives you a design and interface where you'll be able to drag and drop views or elements or components onto the screen, which makes it easier for you to work with. That is actually quite useful. You can actually build your layout in XML, designed with a graphical user interface, which Android Studio helps you to be able to build it. Now, if you look older, and you can see that it's like a tree. And in this app folder, we have a manifest folder, which is where the information about the application is going to go into. I'm not going to go through that now. But if you look into our Java folder, you see that we have a com.example.my application, which is similar to the when we were creating an application, we gave a name of an application, and then we've been given a main activity. If you chose the option of no activity, you wouldn't be able to have this main activity. You have to build it from scratch for yourself. And then we're going to go to this resources folder. In this resources folder, you see you have a folder for images, you have a folder for layouts, you have a folder for bitmap, and a folder for values. We'll go through this in later tutorials, but for now, the one you need is the main activity and the activity main. So you would also see on your screen that you have this activity main here. This activity main is where you are. I've clicked on this main activity. I am presented with a palette on this side, a component tree, and then I'm able to see how my apps currently look like. And then on the right hand side is an attributes column or panel, which you'll be able to give attributes to each and every single view that you're going to use, because every single element has its own attributes. So by default, you can use Android Studio gives you these three options where you can actually write your layout in code, which is purely XML format, or you can split it. You just have the design on one side and then you be writing in code on one side, or you can build it specifically on design, and which is currently where I am at the moment. Now, if you look at a component tree, it would show you how the view is grouped. So we have a constraint layout, which is one of the layouts. So let's say we go to layouts now to show you the different kind of layouts that Android Studio gives you. So we have a constraint layout, we have a linear layout, two types of linear layouts. You have the horizontal and you have the vertical. We have a frame layout, we have a table layout, we have a table row. We also have a space which can put between views. In Android Studio, automatically gives you a constraint layout, but constraint layout allows you to be free, but you have to add constraints to it each time. For the purpose of these tutorials, I will mostly be using linear layouts because I prefer to use linear layouts. But constraint layouts are very good if you want to be free to drag things and but linear layout just lay things under each other, views and next after each other, which I find it easier to use for now for this tutorial, for this application that we're looking at currently. So what I'm going to do is I will be building this application. I'll be showing you this application through code and also using the design side of things, just so that you'll be able to see how you can combine both of them together. You can purely use your design, or you can use the code side of it, but I prefer to use both, depending on what I am currently doing. So you'll see here that if I click on the code side, you'll be able to see that this is the XML code that is that we're using for the design. So the design that you see here is what we have here. By default, Android Studio have a constraint layout that you can use, but I am going to change this constraint layout to a linear layout. Don't worry about all the other things that you see on the screen. I'll be taking you through it step by step, and I'm doing it this way so that you'll be able to quickly know how to create a project. But as we go throughout, you'll be able to understand that, oh, this is what this does, this is what this does. I don't want to introduce something I'm not using now because it will bring confusion, but I will introduce it when we need to use it so that you know that, oh, okay, so this is what this is for. So I've changed my layout from constraint layout to a linear layout. And you can see here that each element or view, should we say, each element that we have here right now has some attributes. So these are the attributes. When you go to the design side of it, you see the attributes on this right-hand side, which you can use. It's a graphical interface, so you can use that to build your elements or give it some attributes information. But for me, I'm going to go back to the code. So you can see here that I have, we have an XML app, we have the tools, we have the layouts, we have the context as well. So the context is the main activity that we're using. So for linear layout, remember when I showed you about the design side of the linear layout, we saw that when we looked at the palette, we saw that we had horizontal, we have vertical. So I need to specify to Android Studio which kind of linear layout that I'm about to use. The good thing about Android Studio is the minute you start to type in an attribute that exists, Android Studio will help you to finish it off. So for me, I'm going to choose a vertical layout. And then by default, Android Studio always gives you a text view hello world, which is normal usually. But for this application, what we're going to create in this application is we're going to create a simple fixed username and password application, which we would store a fixed username and a password, and then we are going to ask a user to enter a username and a password. If the user enters the username and the password correctly, we will say welcome, or we will say, listen, get out of here, mate. You can't sign into here. But as we're building it, I'll also be taking you through the layouts on how you can use the layouts as how you would like to use the layout. So I've just taken out a text view. I'm going to go back to the design just to show you that the text view has disappeared. So in this component tree, you realize that there's nothing else inside or under the linear layout now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my linear layout an ID just in case I would like to actually use my linear layout later on. So let's say I'll give it layout. Let's say layout main. I'll call it layout main. I usually like to, when I'm naming my variables or IDs, I usually like to give it a name that matches up to exactly what it is, so that later on when your code gets a lot, you'll be able to tell that, oh, this actually refers to a layout. So I've called it layout main. So that will be the ID of that layout now. You can see here that the minute we gave an ID, Android Studio changed it from just saying linear layout to layout main. So that's what we have currently. You can see here that we have a layout width of a match parent. You can see you have a layout height. You can make it wrap content, which means that depending on the content that you have, the layout would automatically be that size. We can change the visibility, the rotation. As you scroll through down, you'll be able to see, you can also change the orientation of that layout as well. So yeah, let's start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to text. Now, when you go to text, you'll be given options of a text view. Text view is basically like just a normal text that will show up on the screen. Then you have edit texts, which will have an underline underneath, which means that they are boxes that you can actually input something inside. So for our application that we're going to build, we would have two plain texts, which would ask the user to enter their username and their password. But Android Studio actually gives you the option to select an edit text, which would have a password, which means I will hide the password, or numeric password, or email, or phone. For this purpose, I'm solely going to use just a plain text for now, but later on we'll go through the different edit texts that we can use depending on the application that we are going to build. So at this stage, I don't want you to be overwhelmed. We are going to go through everything together and go step by step for you to be able to understand exactly where we are and how we get there. Forget about everything else on the screen. I will show you exactly each step, how it works. So I'm just going to drag a plain text onto the screen. So I'll just click on it and then I'll drag it inside here. And I've dragged plain text. I think I dragged it wrong. Let me drag it properly. So I have an edit text inside of here. You can see here there's an edit text here. By default, it's giving it an edit text person name. You can either change the ID here, or you can do it in the code. Let me just change it here for now. I'm going to call it EDT, which stands for edit text. And I'm just going to call it edit text username. So I have changed my edit text to username because I'm changing the name. Android Studio because Android Studio has built an application, it has many files that is connected. So we're just going to refactor it, because when we added it, it had a different name. So now we have to change the name and change it everywhere else that ID exists into EDTE username. So what we have now a text called the username. I'm going to drag another one onto the screen. That's going to be of course our password. Hold on one second. Let me just drag that onto the screen. 1 second, guys. So usually, sometimes Android Studio will tell you it would help you to fix certain things, so you can fix certain things in your work. Actually, rather than doing this, because I've done one in the design section, let's do the other one in the code. So what we have here, when you come back to the code, you would see here that we have our edit text, we have our layout, which is to match the parent. So because the match the parent means that it will take over whatever width the parent element that is in have. So in this case, our linear layout is also matching the screen size. So we have the match parent here as well. So our edit text will take the width of the linear layout. And then we're going to make the layout height a wrap content, because if we make a match parent, it will be as long as the linear layout. So we'll just keep it as a wrap content for now. And then we have an input type, which is a text person name. I mean, we can change this later on. For now, I'll just keep it here for now. We don't even have to have that in well, let's see if we take it out, we give it as an issue. It wouldn't give us an issue really. And then we have a text. Now this text is what you would usually see the minute your application is loaded. It will show up a name in the field. Don't get this wrong. This text is different from a hint. So every time a user starts to type in, it will always start with a name already in the box, which I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is change that to a hint, so that it is almost as it's a placeholder. The minute the user starts to type in it, it disappears. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another edit text, which will be our password. So I'm going to make that a match parent. And then I'm going to make the height wrap content, and I'm going to close it off. And then I am going to give it an ID. So at the minute I type ID, Android Studio will help me with my ID. I'm going to call it edit password. And then I am going to give it a hint as well. So let's give it a hint. And then let's say password. Let me change the name part to your username, so there's no confusion caused. And then I'm going to create a button. Now, why am I creating a button? Because we want the user, when the user clicks on the button, to check the username and the password. So again, I'm going to make the button match parent. The height is going to be wrap content. And then I'm going to do the text of the button. Let's just say log in. And then I'm going to close it off. And this is what we currently have. Now let's go to the design section just to see what our application looks like now. So this is what we have. We have a username, we have a password, we have a login button. Last thing is you see these exclamation marks here. If you click on them, Android Studio tries to help you, tells you that, oh, the item height is 45 dp, you know, make it larger so that other people will be able to click on it. It might look smaller on the screen. So if I click on fix, Android Studio would sort that out for me. But they'll still give a warning sign, which we'll come back to the warning signs later on. So we have an EDT username, we have an EDT password, we have a button, which is called login. So I'm going to go to the code section actually, and I'm going to give my button an ID. So let's call it BTN login. So this is a simple design where we have a username, we have a password, and we have a button. And this is how it looks in the design. Now I'm going to add a last element or component view, whatever we call it, onto the screen because I want that to be where I display my message. I can either display as an alert box, but I would like a text box there, which would show all the information that I wanted to show inside of there. So let's create a text view, and then let's say match parent, wrap content. Let's give it an ID. I'm going to call it TXT display. I like to call it TXT display so that it displays the messages on that, what we're working on. Yeah, and this is it, our simple layout design. When you're using linear layouts, you can add a whole lot of things. So in our palette, we have buttons, we have image buttons, chip group, checkboxes, radio groups. Once we start to create applications in that, I will start to use that as well. But for now, we're just dealing with just text boxes and buttons for now. When you go to layouts, again, we went to layouts, we have containers, we have helpers, we have Google, add view, map view, we have legacy. These are legacy items, are items that are usually not being used anymore, but they're still kept there. So it means that later on, they might remove it from there, but they're still being used at the moment. So that is our simple design. Now we've created our design, and our design has no connection with our back-end code. If we come to our main activity, you see here that we have a set content view. Now this content view just tells you what should I display onto the screen? What view am I displaying onto the screen? And then where this R here refers to our resource folder. So in our resource folder, we actually have an R. So if you over it, it will tell you that there is a class, a final class called R, which obviously refers to that R. And in that we have all the resources that's stored. So, and then because we have IDs, we have layouts, etc., all of those are stored in there. So this resource folder gives you a reference to those kind of components that we have there. And the R extends the objects. There's an object class that extends it from. So usually when we click on, let's say we're using this resource here that we have here, if you click on the dot, it gives you many things that you can have access to: class, a layout, an ID. For this purpose, we want to show our layout. So we'll choose the layout. So that layout refers to this layout resource folder here. So it goes inside of here. And then when we hit another dot, it would give us the opportunity to choose what kind of layout that we currently have in there. Android Studio have other layouts there that's already created that you can't see here. But for this purpose, we're going to choose our activity main. And this is what's going to help us going forward. I know I'm not talking about other things. That's because I don't want to introduce them, because we don't need them for now. I don't want there to be confusion. So let's just follow with what we're doing here now. Later on, when we start to build the application, we'll be able to know about the other things. So right now, this is our main activity.java. Now we want to get references to our layout view components or elements that we have there, so that when a user clicks on username, we'll be able to, get whatever username we have. At the moment, it's two separate things that there's no connection at the moment. So when we run this on create, it just creates this layout and brings us to the screen. That's all that we have at the moment. So we're going to import some classes. Now, because we're using an edit text now, a layout, we need to import an edit text class, which would give us a reference to that layout, that component that we have. So if I click on, if I type in edit text, Android Studio would help you to know that there's an edit text class that exists, there's a widget that exists. So when I click on here, it automatically imports it for you. So it's imported this class because I'm telling Android Studio that I'm going to use an edit text, class. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the similar names to the layout that I created. So in this case, it will be EDTE username, EDT password, and then we'll have BTN. No, actually, those are the only two that we had. So because I also had a button, I need to import a button class, which I'm going to be using. So you can think of this as we're just creating, like, let's say object variables or variables, but classes that we're using. So button, let's just call it BTN login. Android Studio is telling me that there's a widget or there's a class, there's a button class that I can import. So if you click on Alt Enter, Android Studio would help you to import that class. And then we also had a text view. So I'm going to import a text view and do txt. And let's call it display. So I've created these object classes or variables, if you want to call them that. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to now match up these variables that we've created and match it up with our components or elements from our layout. Now, we need to do this because there needs to be a connection. We need to attach a handler to it so that we'll be able to have a reference to that particular element. So in this case, we have is an EDTE username equals, because we're going to store whatever we find there inside this EDTE username. Now, this is something that's very new. We're going to use this find view by ID. Now, find this view ID method help us to find a view, which is any view that's created. Whenever you create an ID in your activity main, whenever you add an element and you create an ID, that ID, we can find that view by that ID. So if you've done web development before, it's quite similar to document.getElement by ID. So you're trying to find an ID which you've created in the document, and then you're trying to get a reference to it. So in my case, again, we're going to use the resource folder because that's where all our IDs are stored, all our layouts, all our animators, our colors, our drawable integers, etc. So in this case, we're looking for an ID. So when I find this ID and I hit dot again, you would see here that it gives me several elements with the IDs in there. But I'm looking for EDTE username. So now have EDTE username. Again, let's do the same for the rest of our elements. So what we have here is we have find view by ID r dot ID. I'm going to do the password. So now we have a handler. So now we actually have access to that element in the layout. So now we can do something with it. If I attach the handler to it, we can do something with it or a reference to it. So let's do the same thing for our button. Let's do BT and login equals find view by ID r dot ID button login. And then we can do the same thing for our text view. So text view txt display equals find view by ID r dot ID txt display. So now we've actually found the IDs that relates to that element that we created in that case. So if you have many components, you have to do the same thing for this step so that you'll be able to do something with it, with the element when it's being used. So if you've managed to get through here, you're doing a great job. Okay, we've now been attached to it. What's left is actually quite something that will be quite simple for us to handle now. So now what we need to do is we are creating a user login, a name and a password. I know this video is meant to be 20 minutes. So if you've got through to this part, what we're going to do is I'm going to stop this video because it's just a short introduction. I just went through review on the activity main and the main activity, and then continue in the next video.